I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would start a war with an entire neighborhood. But that was before everything changed. Before the day a man with a badge, a neighbor hiding behind his title as an HOA cop, pulled the trigger and shattered my world. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. The kind where birds chirp a little louder, and the sun feels warmer than usual. My son Caleb had just turned 14. He was bright, full of laughter, and confined to a wheelchair since he was 7. Spinal muscular atrophy. We never let it define him. Caleb was brave, braver than most grown men I know. He loved the outdoors, even if it was just a ride around our block. That morning, he'd asked to go to the corner to watch the trash truck. It was one of his little joys. We lived in a so-called tight-knit community with rules for everything. How high your grass can grow, what kind of wreath you're allowed to hang on your door. The HOA had always been overbearing, but never dangerous. That morning, I heard a noise I'll never forget. A loud pop, sharp and final. At first, I thought it was a firecracker. Kids sometimes lit them too early in the season. But then I saw the flash of red and a scream that came from somewhere deep inside me. Caleb. My boy. My only child. He was lying there, motionless in his chair, his talkie, the one we used whenever he went for a roll around the block. I dropped everything and ran. My feet felt like they weren't even touching the ground. Neighbors stepped out of their houses, some gasping, some just standing there, frozen. No one moved to help. No one even called out. Just silence and stares. And him, Officer Brent Caldwell, standing over my son with a walkie in one hand and his other hand still trembling near his hip. His lips moved, but I couldn't hear a word. My ears were ringing. The ambulance came fast. Too fast, almost like someone had already called it before it happened. They loaded Caleb up, rushed him to the hospital, and I rode in the back, holding his hand, whispering to him that everything would be okay. That I was there. That nothing was going to happen. But I was lying. I didn't know anything anymore. Caleb survived. But barely. The bullet had missed anything vital by inches, but the damage was enough to put him in the ICU for days. The doctors said it was a miracle he made it. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But all I could think about was why it happened. Why would a neighborhood security officer, someone who's supposed to just patrol for noisy dogs or kids leaving bikes on the sidewalk, pull a weapon on a boy in a wheelchair? They tried to spin it. Said there was a misunderstanding. That Caleb looked like a threat. That's what Brent Caldwell claimed. He said my son had something shiny in his hand. Boy. A plastic walkie-talkie shaped like a police radio. Brent said he feared for his safety. And just like that, the HOA board circled the wagons. They released a statement saying they were deeply sorry for the unfortunate incident, and that Officer Caldwell followed protocol. Protocol. Since when is protocol shooting a disabled kid without warning? I didn't sleep for nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Caleb's face, pale in pain, confused. I saw Brent's eyes. Cold, empty, no regret. And worse, I saw the neighbors. The same ones who smiled at us at block parties. Who patted Caleb on the head like he was some kind of mascot. They all turned away. Not one person came forward. Not one offered to testify or even say what they saw. That's when I started digging. I went through every HOA meeting record I could get my hands on. I read minutes from years back, watched videos from board meetings, even old security footage that shouldn't have been public, but someone anonymously dropped it in my mailbox. And the more I looked, the more I realized this wasn't just about Brent. This neighborhood wasn't what it seemed. Brent Caldwell wasn't a random hire. He was brought in 2 years ago under some obscure clause that allowed the HOA to contract private enforcement officers with law enforcement backgrounds. Brent had been a deputy in another county, let go after a string of complaints involving aggressive behavior. No charges were ever filed. Everything swept under the rug. Then suddenly, he shows up here, in a gated community that doesn't even need that kind of security. Why? The board president, Sharon Winslow, had ties to the company that hired Brent. Her cousin owned the agency. I found that in a filing she failed to disclose during a recent budget vote. It was all starting to fit. But not in a neat way. It was messy, corrupt, and worse, it was deliberate. I started noticing things after that. My trash cans were being left in the middle of the street. My mail went missing. My car tires were mysteriously flat one morning. Small things, but they added up. I was being watched, warned. I wasn't supposed to be asking questions. I wasn't supposed to pull at threads. But they made one mistake. They hurt my son. Kept going. Late nights, quiet phone calls, visits to past residents who'd mysteriously moved away in the middle of the night without notice. One woman, Mrs. Langley, cried when I asked her about Brent. She said her husband tried to report him a year ago after Brent pushed their teenage son during a routine inspection. A week later, they were hit with fines for violations they'd never even heard of. Lawn too dry. Garage door paint too dull. They sold their house under pressure and left. I began to understand this wasn't just about one bad guy with a badge. The whole system in our neighborhood was built on fear, power, and silence. And the people in charge, those smiling, well-dressed board members, had kept it going because no one ever stood up. Till now. I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every document, every neighbor too scared to talk but willing to share anonymously. I created a file, then a backup of that file. And I shared it, quietly, carefully, first with a lawyer, then a few journalists I trusted. I knew I couldn't go head-on, not yet, but I could spread the truth bit by bit. Could build a case, let it grow under the surface. But they felt it. A shift. The Joy stopped sending notices to my house. Brent's patrols didn't come down my street anymore. And Sharon stopped attending board meetings in person. Something had them rattled. Maybe it was the pressure building. Maybe they knew I had more. Or maybe they were planning something else. One night I came home and found my front door open. Nothing stolen. Nothing broken. But on the kitchen table was a photo of me, standing in Caleb's hospital room, holding his hand. A message scribbled on the back in shaky writing. Back down, or lose more. That was the night I realized I couldn't just expose them. I had to take over. Not with rage. Not with revenge. But with something stronger: control, influence, power. I began attending the HOA meetings. Quietly at first. Asking questions. Requesting records. Then I started talking to neighbors one-on-one. I found the ones who had been wronged. The ones who were tired of the board's intimidation. And I found something unexpected. People were ready for change. They just needed someone to start it. So I stepped forward. I ran for an open position on the board. And I won. By a landslide. But that was just the beginning. Because what they didn't know was that I wasn't here to keep their rules. I was here to burn them down piece by piece. And the first target, Brent Caldwell. But he had vanished. Just like that. No one had seen him in weeks. His house was empty. His car gone. And the only thing left behind was a single, unmarked envelope in my mailbox. Inside it, a copy of Caleb's medical file. And a key. To what, I didn't know yet. But I was going to find out. I held that key in my hand for a long time, staring at it like it might somehow tell me what it was for. It was small, old-looking, not the kind you'd use for a house or a mailbox. It felt heavier than it should have, maybe because of what it represented. Someone had gone out of their way to leave it for me. But who? And why? I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with that envelope in front of me, flipping through Caleb's medical records again. Most of it I already knew. Injury reports, surgery notes, rehab schedules. But tucked near the back, there was a page I didn't recognize. It wasn't even medical. It was a property document, half torn, with coordinates written in pen on the side. Coordinates? Why would a medical file include coordinates? The next morning, after making sure Caleb was okay and settled with my sister, I drove out to the edge of town. The coordinates led to an old maintenance shed on the outskirts of the neighborhood, technically still on HOA land, but forgotten. The kind of place no one pays attention to. The key slid right into the rusted lock. Inside it was mostly what you'd expect: tools, paint cans, old signs. But in the back corner, under a dusty tarp, there was a filing cabinet. Every drawer was packed. FOI records going back almost 10 years. Some were labeled with dates, others with names. My hands shook as I pulled open the middle drawer. Brent Caldwell. Dozens of files. Photos. Even video stills. It looked like someone had been documenting him for years. Whoever had gathered this had been watching him long before Caleb got hurt. There were incident logs, internal emails from board members, some even mentioning payouts and quiet resolutions. The worst part: my son wasn't the first. There was a boy named Luis in 2021 who broke his arm after an accidental encounter with Brent. A mother, Jenna, who filed a complaint after Brent showed up at her house at 2 a.m. over a supposed noise violation. And a man named Derek Mills. His file had a red sticker marked closed, but there was no explanation why. It wasn't just Brent either. The deeper I dug, the more I saw how twisted the system was. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were controlling people. They had ways of silencing complaints, rerouting legal claims, even working with a private legal group that specialized in settlements with non-disclosure agreements. All quietly swept under the surface. But there was one folder with no label, just a blank tab. Inside was a list of addresses. All of them within the neighborhood. Next to each one was a name and a date. Most of the dates were within the past 5 years. Some had checks next to them. Others had a red X. Mine had neither. I photographed everything. Every file, every note. Then I put everything back the way I found it. Whoever left me that key wanted me to see this, but they didn't want anyone to know it had been touched. I drove home with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck. Over the next few days, things got stranger. My internet kept going down at night. My phone would ring once, then stop, and no one would be there when I answered. I started noticing a black SUV parked at the end of the block. Not every day, but often enough. It never stayed long. Just long enough for me to notice it was there. One evening, while Caleb was sleeping, I got a knock at the door. A woman I didn't recognize stood there, mid-30s, brown hair pulled back, dressed like she'd just come from the gym. She introduced herself as Naomi, a new renter on the next street over. But the way she talked, her questions, her interest in the HOA, it felt rehearsed. She said she was curious about the neighborhood, had heard some strange things, wanted to know if I'd experienced any of it. I didn't say much, just nodded and smiled. But when she turned to leave, she slipped a note into my hand like it was second nature. I waited until she was gone to read it. Meet me at the park bench by the creek. Midnight. Come alone. I went. I shouldn't have, but I did. She was already there, sitting in the dark like she belonged there. She said she used to live in a different HOA in another city, one run by the same group behind ours. Same patterns, same abuse of power. She'd been investigating them for over a year, trying to expose how these private security contracts were being used to intimidate, silence, even remove people who disrupted order. She called it enforced compliance, a term some HOAs were using internally, using private security to maintain control under the cover of legality. Brent was just one of many. He wasn't working alone. And when I mentioned the file in the shed, her face went pale. She didn't know about it. She asked for copies. I told her I'd think about it. I still didn't know who to trust. Meanwhile, on the surface, things looked normal. Neighborhood potlucks continued. Kids played on the sidewalks. Play meetings were dull and full of small talk. But the cracks were showing. Sharon Winslow missed another meeting. One of the board members, Thomas, resigned suddenly, citing family issues. And the neighborhood newsletter, usually filled with fluff and lawn care tips, had a strange message buried in the fine print. Security concerns are being handled. Please report all unusual behavior. I started to wonder if they knew how much I knew. And if they were planning something worse than just intimidation. I kept Caleb close, barely let him out of my sight. I told him it was because I needed him to rest, but the truth was, I was scared. Not just for him, but for what I might do if they came near him again. Then, one morning as I opened the door to grab the paper, there was a note taped to the front. The next vote decides everything. Just that. No name, no explanation. I went back inside and looked at the HOA board calendar. 3 weeks from now. An emergency vote. One that hadn't been discussed in any previous meeting. And something told me this vote wasn't about lawn rules or mailbox heights. It was about control. And I had to figure out which side I was really on. Because in this neighborhood, the line between safety and silence was paper thin. And someone was about to tear it wide open. 3 weeks felt like 3 years. Every day between that warning note and the emergency vote dragged like a storm cloud waiting to crack. I couldn't sleep, could barely eat. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, checking every car that passed by, every neighbor who waved a little too long. I kept Caleb close, always in the same room, pretending everything was fine, smiling when I had to. But inside I was watching everything. I spent those weeks digging deeper. Naomi and I met in secret, always in public places, always careful. She'd found more files, news clippings, old HOA board members who'd suddenly resigned from other neighborhoods run by the same security contractor. Some had left the state completely. One had gone missing. What we were dealing with wasn't just a crooked board or a power-hungry cop. It was an entire network hiding behind neighborhood rules and corporate shields. Meanwhile, the board pretended like nothing was wrong. They handed out flyers about the upcoming vote, saying it was just a structural amendment to improve operational efficiency. Nothing alarming, just some procedural changes. But the language was vague, deliberately vague. Buried in the proposal was a clause that would give full control of hiring, enforcement, and legal management to an outside private agency. One already selected, one with no public accountability. If passed, the board wouldn't just be strict. They'd be untouchable. I tried warning people, quietly, one at a time. The older couple across the street, who once had their Christmas lights forcibly taken down by Brent. The single mom next door, who got fined $300 for her recycling bin being crooked. Some believed me. Some didn't. Some were too scared to care. But enough listened. Hope. Then, a week before the vote, something changed. Naomi disappeared. She didn't answer her phone. Her apartment was empty, like no one had ever lived there. When I asked the property manager, he said the unit had been leased to a corporate tenant. No name listed. Just a shell company. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the blank door, and felt a chill run through me. She had warned me once. If I vanish, it means they're watching you now. And I knew she was right. That night, someone tried to break into my house. I woke to the sound of my back gate swinging open. My motion sensor lights came on, then immediately flickered off. I grabbed the bat I kept beside the bed and made my way to the kitchen. I didn't see anyone, but the door frame was scratched. Someone had tried a key. Not mine. A different one. Like they were testing how easy it would be to walk right in. Called the police. Not our HOA security, real police. They showed up 30 minutes later, took notes, said there wasn't much they could do. No fingerprints. No footage. My cameras had been disabled, probably remotely. One officer gave me a look that said more than his words. You're in something deep. I knew that already. The next morning, Caleb found something in the mailbox. A single piece of paper. On it, printed in bold black ink, withdraw, or he disappears next. That was it. That was the moment I stopped questioning. Stopped hesitating. I wasn't just trying to take over a board anymore. I was trying to stop something dangerous. Something that had gone too far for too long. I went back to the storage shed with gloves and a backpack. I took every file this time. Every photo. Every audio clip. I scanned them, encrypted them, sent them to multiple cloud backups with scheduled releases in case something happened to me. I even left a drive with my lawyer and told him, if I missed the next meeting, to go public. Then I did something I never thought I would. I called Sharon Winslow. She picked up fast, almost like she'd been waiting for me. Her tone was calm, polite even. She invited me to her house, said she'd been meaning to talk. I agreed. Not because I trusted her, but because I needed to see what she'd say face to face. I left Caleb with my sister again, packed a recorder in my coat, and drove over just as the sun was going down. Sharon lived in one of the biggest homes in the neighborhood. Gated, perfectly trimmed hedges, lights on timers. She met me at the door with a warm smile and cold eyes. We sat in her living room, and for a moment, it almost felt normal. But then she leaned in, and her voice dropped. "You've made quite a mess," she said. "I don't think you realize how much is riding on this vote. How many people have invested in this outcome?" I stayed quiet. She kept going. "You think this is about a kid in a wheelchair. But it's bigger. We're talking about a model. One that keeps order, keeps profits up, keeps problems quiet. You want to burn it down, fine. But you won't like what rises in its place." I asked her what she meant. She just smiled. "You should think very carefully about tomorrow. You still have time to disappear. Take your son. Start over." I left without another word. I had my recording. But I also had the truth now. They weren't just defending Brent. They were protecting a system. And if the vote passed, it would be permanent. The night before the vote, the power went out on my street. All the houses went dark. Just mine. None of the others. I sat in the living room, holding Caleb's hand, watching the shadows move outside the window. Someone was trying to shake me, break me. But it was too late for that. I had everything ready. A speech. Evidence. Names. Tomorrow I'd walk into that meeting and put it all on the table. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. Something worse was coming. Because just before midnight, my phone lit up with a single message from a blocked number. "He's already inside." Froze. The message stayed on my screen, glowing in the dark room like a quiet scream. "He's already inside." My first instinct was Caleb. I turned to him on the couch. He was still there, half asleep, unaware. But my heart was pounding so loud I could barely think. I grabbed the flashlight and scanned the room. Every corner, every doorway. Nothing looked off. But that didn't matter. The point was clear. Whoever was sending these messages knew everything. Where we were. What we were doing. They weren't outside anymore. They were closer. I moved Caleb into the bedroom, locked the door, and quietly wedged a chair beneath the knob. I didn't tell him what the message said. I just told him we were playing a quiet game, and that he had to stay under the blankets and keep his headphones on. I think he could tell I was scared, but he didn't say anything. He just nodded and held my hand. Then I checked the house. Every door. Every closet. Even the attic. Nothing. But I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. Not just fear, presence. Like someone had been here recently. I went into the garage, and that's when I saw it. A small red light blinking behind the water heater. I leaned closer. It was a listening device. Taped to the wall, half hidden behind the pipe. It wasn't big. Just enough to pick up sound. I ripped it out. Then I found a second one in the kitchen, tucked behind the stove. And a third under the hallway console table. They'd been listening to everything. Not just tonight. For days. Maybe longer. That's how they stayed ahead. That's how they knew where I was going, what I'd found. And that's when I realized, someone had helped them. It wasn't just a stranger slipping into my house in the middle of the night. Someone close to me had given them access. I thought about Naomi. About how easily she'd disappeared. About how fast she'd found me in the first place. She said she'd been investigating them. But she'd also known things I never told her. What if she wasn't working against them? What if she was just keeping me on a leash, pushing me just far enough to make noise but not enough to cause real damage? Or worse. What if she wasn't gone at all? The next morning came too fast. Barely slept. I dressed Caleb, packed his things, and sent him with my sister to stay outside the neighborhood for the day. I didn't tell her why. I just said it was urgent. That he needed to be away. She didn't argue. She could hear it in my voice. Then I got ready. I put the files in a folder, printed copies of the audio transcripts, labeled the flash drives, triple-checked my speech. If something happened to me, I wanted the trail to be clear. I wanted them to know I wasn't bluffing. I arrived at the HOA meeting 20 minutes early. It was held in the clubhouse at the center of the neighborhood, normally used for birthday parties and community barbecues. But today it looked different. Security guards flanked the entrance. Not the usual ones. These guys were dressed in black, earpieces in, with no badges showing. Just like the SUV I'd seen circling the block. No question they were part of the private security firm. The one trying to take over. Inside, the room was already half full. Neighbors in folding chairs. Coffee and snacks on the side table, like this was just another casual gathering. Sharon Winslow stood at the front, smiling like always. Her eyes found mine. And for a moment, neither of us looked away. I took a seat near the middle. Not too close, not too far. Then something unexpected happened. Thomas, the board member who'd resigned, walked in. People murmured. Some whispered. He hadn't been seen since he stepped down. But now he walked to the front, took the microphone and tapped it once. The room went quiet. "I know this isn't on the agenda," he began. "But I need to say something before this vote happens." Sharon tensed. Thomas looked around the room, and when his eyes found mine, he nodded. Barely noticeable, but it was there. Then he turned back to the audience. "There are things you don't know about this proposal. About the people behind it." Sharon stepped forward. "Thomas, this isn't your role anymore. Please take a seat." But Thomas didn't move. His voice didn't shake. "Let me finish." That's when the door opened again. And Naomi walked in. She looked different. Not afraid. Not like someone who'd been running. She was dressed clean, casual. Confident. She walked straight to Sharon and stood beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world. The room went quiet again. Naomi smiled. "We're happy to address concerns after the vote." And that's when I realized. She hadn't disappeared. She'd changed sides. Or maybe she'd never left them in the first place. The message, the warning, the encouragement. It was all part of a larger plan. Controlled burn. Let me dig just enough to stir up noise, to flush out anyone on the board with a conscience. Thomas. Like others who'd started asking questions. Get them to show their hand. Then silence them all at once. Clean sweep. That was the second plot. The real one. The vote was just a show. The trap was already set. And I had walked straight into it. The room felt like it had no air left. Naomi stood there with that careful smile. And Sharon had slid seamlessly back into her polished persona. Calm and controlled. Thomas looked shaken now. Unsure whether to keep speaking or sit down. People whispered, confused. Eyes bouncing between the front of the room and the printed ballots in their hands. I stood up. My voice was steady, but every muscle in my body was on edge. "Before anyone votes," I said, "I need to show you something." Sharon stepped forward quickly. "I'm sorry, but this isn't the time for." I didn't let her finish. I pulled the flash drive from my coat and walked straight to the projector plugged into the laptop on the table. The tech guy standing there hesitated. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You want the truth or not?" He moved. The screen behind the board flickered to life, and I opened the folder. First, the audio recording of Brent's voice, the moment he bragged about putting that wheelchair punk in his place, thinking no one else would hear. Gasps filled the room. I saw one neighbor cover her mouth. Another muttered, "My God." Then I opened the documents. The contractor bids hidden under false names, the fake resignations, the hush payments linked to board members who'd vanished. And finally, Sharon's voice on the phone with Naomi, the night after the first threat. "If he won't back down, we'll make sure the vote's not a problem. Either way, he's finished." For a full minute, no one moved. Then everything happened at once. Thomas stood up again and yelled, "Shut it down!" Security moved toward me fast, but before they reached me, a woman in the front row stood. Then a man in the back. "We have a right to know what's really going on," someone shouted. And just like that, the room turned. Neighbors who had been silent now stood with their phones out, recording, asking questions, demanding answers. Sharon tried to raise her voice over the crowd, but it was too late. The illusion had shattered. She wasn't in control anymore. Naomi tried to slip out the side door, but I was faster. I met her there. We were face to face. "You used me," I said quietly. She didn't deny it. Just gave me that same calm look. "You wanted justice. This is as close as anyone gets." I stared at her. "Then you don't know me at all." Sighed sirens. Someone must have called the police. Real ones this time. Within minutes, officers arrived, and chaos spilled out of the clubhouse. Sharon tried to leave quietly, but the footage I'd shown had already made its way online. Some neighbors had sent it to news outlets. Others were already tagging city officials. The damage couldn't be buried now. The vote was halted. A full investigation was promised. Brent was placed on leave, and later criminal charges followed. Turns out Caleb's case wasn't isolated. Other complaints had been buried over the years. And now they were all coming up. I thought that was the end of it. But a week later something strange happened. Got a letter. No return address. Just a simple envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a single photo. Grainy black and white. It showed Caleb's wheelchair parked on a porch. But it wasn't our porch. There was a timestamp on the corner. And the date was from 2 weeks before the shooting. Didn't make sense. Caleb hadn't been anywhere else. That wasn't our house. I flipped the photo over. Just one sentence written in neat, tiny letters. He wasn't the target. And that's when it hit me. Everything I'd fought for, everything I'd uncovered. What if the shooting, the threats, even the vote, was just one piece of something bigger? What if Caleb getting hurt wasn't the start of this story at all? What if it was the middle? I stood there on the porch, staring at that photo, heart racing again, mind spinning with new questions. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure who I was fighting anymore. And worse, I wasn't sure it was over. For days, I stared at that photo like it held a hidden message I hadn't cracked yet. Caleb's wheelchair in front of a house we'd never been to. The timestamp didn't lie. And the note, "He wasn't the target," kept echoing in my head like a warning I was too late to hear. I couldn't sleep. I checked every camera, every app, even went through old footage on my phone, hoping I'd missed something. But I knew deep down that the story I thought had ended was only part of a longer, darker truth. Still, I had to move forward. For Caleb. For myself. The fallout from the HOA meeting had been swift. Local media picked up the story, especially the part about the private security firm tied to shady contracts and community intimidation. Sharon resigned under pressure, but she didn't disappear. She hired lawyers, gave a few carefully worded statements about being misled, and tried to wash her hands of it all. Naomi vanished again. This time I didn't go looking for her. I was done playing her game. Thomas helped take over the interim board. He asked me to be part of it. First I said no. I was tired. I didn't want power, I just wanted peace. But he reminded me of something I'd forgotten in all this chaos. Communities don't fix themselves. Someone has to show up. Someone has to fight, not just when things are burning, but when it's quiet, especially then. So I said yes. Caleb got better. Slowly. The nightmares didn't stop right away, and he still flinched at loud sounds. But we started new routines. Weekend walks in new parks. New therapists. A different kind of quiet. I saw pieces of the old him coming back. One afternoon he even told a joke. One of those goofy, silly ones he used to love. Hit me like a wave. That moment mattered more than anything I'd done in that clubhouse. Still, the photo haunted me. I finally took it to the detective working the HOA case. He looked it over, scanned it into a file, and said he'd dig into it. But he didn't seem hopeful. No one could trace where it came from. No fingerprints. No smudges. Nothing. Just a message that refused to explain itself. A door cracked open with no clear way through. Weeks passed. Investigations unfolded. Brent was arrested on unrelated charges, tampering with evidence, obstruction. They reopened old files, found missing reports from other homeowners who'd been harassed into silence. Lawsuits started. People talked. The neighborhood, once so quiet and polite, was finally speaking up. But here's the strange thing. After all that noise, after everything that came out, life didn't go back to normal. Just changed. The neighborhood meetings got longer. Real people started showing up. Not just the ones who wanted to control everything, but the ones who just wanted to be heard. People like Maria, who'd lived on the same street for 20 years and never once been invited to a board meeting. Or Jamal, who'd been fined for leaving a basketball hoop outside for his kids. They started asking questions, challenging rules, demanding fairness. That, more than anything, felt like a win. I kept the photo in a drawer. Not as a threat, but as a reminder. That not everything has a neat ending. That sometimes, justice doesn't come wrapped in headlines or court decisions. Sometimes it's just a slow unraveling. Choice to show up anyway. To do the hard thing. To protect the people you love even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared. One evening, months later, as fall started to settle in, I got another envelope in the mail. This one wasn't blank. Had a return address. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a letter. Just a few lines, handwritten. You were never supposed to be involved. But you did the right thing. Keep watching. It's not over yet. It wasn't signed. But the handwriting, it looked familiar. I showed it to Thomas. He said what I was thinking, Naomi. Was it a warning? Thank you. I didn't know. And maybe I never would. But part of me believed her. Whatever had started with that vote, that shooting, that first knock on my door, it wasn't fully over. But something else had changed. Me. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't afraid of HOA letters or shady glances or even mysterious notes. I'd faced the worst of it. And I was still standing. And now I had a seat at the table, not just to watch, but to speak. The neighborhood didn't fall apart. In fact, it got stronger. Slower, messier, but stronger. The people who had once been afraid to knock on doors now led cleanup crews, started neighborhood watch groups, planted gardens where old signs used to warn about fines. We weren't perfect. But we were different. Wait. And Caleb, he was riding again. Not far. Just down the sidewalk, with a little flag attached to his chair and a smile on his face that made the whole street feel lighter. One of the newer board members, an older woman named Grace, bought him a set of safety lights that blinked red and blue. So people see you before they judge you, she said. That hit me harder than she probably meant it to. I've learned that in neighborhoods like ours, power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It's the kind that creeps in through rules and paperwork and fake smiles. But the truth has a way of echoing. Once it's out there, it doesn't go away. I never set out to take over a neighborhood. I just wanted to protect my son. But I found out something I never expected, that fighting for him meant fighting for all of us. That justice, even when it feels impossible, starts with showing up, speaking out, and refusing to sit down, even when they tell you the meeting's over. 'Cause it's never really over. Not until we say it is.